Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Renu Tyagi from Sardar Patel Institute, Ahmedabad. Today we'll talk about the module Physical Conditioning under the paper Physiology and Sports Anthropology. Now let's see what would be the learning objective of this module. After studying the module, we'll be able to discuss the principles which govern the efficient exercise training program. We'll be able to understand the muscular changes and the other bodily changes in response to the training program. Then we'll be able to summarize the anaerobic endurance response developed post training. We'll be explaining the cardiorespiratory adaptations developed due to the aerobic training. When we talk about the performance of an athlete in specific activity, it basically relates to his or her physical fitness. Now let's see what is physical fitness. The physical fitness of an individual may be defined as the physiological state of well-being that provides the foundation for the task of daily living. It's a degree of the protection against the disease developed due to our sedentary lifestyle, and it's a basis for participation in the sports as per the American Alliance for the Health given in 1988. As per the Corbin and Lindsay in 2006, it is defined as the ability of our body systems to work together efficiently so that it allows the people to be healthy and perform effectively their activities of daily living. The various components which are associated with the physical fitness or with the health related physical fitness in particular includes our cardiovascular respiratory system, our endurance or cardiovascular respiratory endurance, which can be termed as the aerobic power, and it also includes our body composition besides muscular strength and endurance. The persistent training enhances these physiological function for the better health or optimal sports performance and has been termed as the physical conditioning. Over time, the immediate or the short-term adjustments translate into the long-term changes in our body and improves the performance of an individuals. These trainings or the physical conditioning programs are specific for an individual or exercise since the outcome is governed by various principles and the factors. Thus, to develop an effective exercise program, we should have or we should try and understand the basic principles of the physical training related with that program. Now let's have a look at the principles of physical training. The principle underlying the physical conditioning are: number 1, overload. To improve our physical fitness, an individual should perform an exercise at intensities greater than the normal. It increases the physiological demand and stimulates the highly specific bodily adaptations for efficient performance. In other words, the regular application of a specific exercise overload would enhance the physiologic function of an individual as per the McArdle in 2010 and Encyclopedia Britannica 2015. For example, in weight training program, muscles will acquire augmented strength or endurance if it is forced to work for a period above their normal capacities. The intensity of the workout should be periodically readjusted so that muscle work continuously above the normal maximal strength and capacities. The appropriate overload needed to maintain or improve a particular level of fitness is achieved by manipulating the frequency of workout, the intensity of the work at each workout, the mode of the activity, and the duration of workout at given intensity. The adaptability of the body to the training program depends on the individual's current level of fitness, genetically determined capacity to adapt to training, as well as his or her fitness goals. Training level and the extent of physical fitness shows a dose-response relationship, and there exists a training threshold beyond which fitness benefit occurs. As we can see from this graph as well, a clear dose-response relationship can be seen. There is a zone within which maximum fitness benefit occurs, and there is an upper limit of the safe training as well. Now let's see what is specificity. The principle of specificity signifies that the adaptation of the body or change in physical fitness is specific to the type of training undertaken. That is, flexibility training would be more effective in enhancing flexibility rather than resistance or strengthening the training. Similarly, the principle applies to the exercises which need resistance or strength-based trainings. Weight training would develop muscular strength but is less effective for developing cardiorespiratory endurance or flexibility. The improvements in bodily functions are specific to the demands or feature imposed by the physical activity. In another way, the specificity refers to the specific adaptation to imposed demands. The training focuses on the major energy system involved in particular exercise. For instance, sports such as basketball majorly require an aerobic energy system, while an individual running in marathon majorly utilizes aerobic energy system. Considering this, the training programs are devised to improve the energy system specific for the given sports. Specificity also applies to muscle groups, where endurance training facilitates oxygen transport and use at the local level of the trained muscles. Such aerobic improvements are the consequences of greater regional blood flow in active tissues via increased microcirculation and effective redistribution of cardiac output, or the both, as per said by the McCardle et al. In 2010. Now, the next characteristic is individualization. When a relatively homogeneous group undergoes endurance training, there are individual differences in the ability to improve the physical fitness. All individuals would not respond similarly to a given training stimulus or achieve the same state of fitness after a stipulated period. Response of any two individuals would vary for the similar dose of physical activity. For example, some people are able to run longer distances or lift more weight or kick a soccer ball more skillfully than others, no matter how much they are trained. The adaptive response to the training may be influenced by an individual's relative fitness level at the beginning of the training. Lower fitness would deliver greater training improvement and applies to healthy individuals as well as those who are at the risk for the diseases. As we can see from this graph, it shows an influence of the initial fitness level of an individual on adaptive response. The optimal training benefits occur when exercise programs are focused on the needs and capacities of an individual. Therefore, a coach should structure the training and conditioning program in such a way that it meets the need of each individual with enhancement in performance. A strenuous exercise program enhances a person's level of fitness regardless of genetic background. However, the limits for developing fitness capacity depends on the genotype. So we can say that the propensity to be a high or low responder is influenced by the genetic factor. For example, the identical twins generally show a similar response for training. If a twin shows high responsiveness to the training, it is likely that the other twin would also be a responder. While if one twin is non-responder, the other would show little improvement towards exercise training, revealed by the study of McArdle et al. In 2010. The next principle for the physical conditioning is reversibility. If an individual discontinue participation in regular physical activity, there would be decline in the physiological adaptations and performance. The metabolic and exercise capacity may be completely lost within several months. In a study, a group of 5 subjects were confined to rest for 20 consecutive days. It resulted into 25% decline in the VO2 max, accompanied by a similar decline in the maximal stroke volume and cardiac output. These physiological changes consequently declined maximal aerobic power by an average of 1% per day. Moreover, the number of capillaries within trained muscle decreased by 14 to 25%. Among elderly individuals, after a detraining period of 4 months, endurance training, adaptation of cardiovascular functions, and body water distribution diminished completely. This is revealed by the study of McArdle et al. In 2010. The rate of decline in fitness level may not be same across various physiological and metabolic function. For example, strength fitness is very resilient and be maintained by doing resistance exercises as infrequently as once a week, while the cardiovascular and cellular fitness reverses more quickly, sometime within just a few days or weeks. Even among highly trained athletes, the beneficial effects of exercise training achieved over years remain transient and reversible. Therefore, most athletes begin a reconditioning program several months prior to the start of the competitive season or maintain some moderate level sports-specific training to slow the decline in physiological functions. Now let's see what is motivation. Motivation has been widely accepted as an essential prerequisite for an athlete to achieve their potential and pursue the goal at all levels of the sports. The motivation is associated with the persistence, performance, and the ability of the sports person to cope better with the competitive stress. According to the self-determination theory of the motivation proposed by Deci and Rand in 1985, there are 3 innate psychological needs. They are self-determination, that is autonomy, the perceived competence, and the relatedness, that is the sense of belongingness. And these 3 components facilitate the optimal motivation, self-regulation, and well-being. The motivation can be of 3 types. It can be intrinsic, extrinsic, and amotivation. Now let's see individually or separately what these 3 motivation actually means. Let's come to the intrinsic motivation. The intrinsic motivation relates to the inherent tendency to work and challenges to extend and exercise one's capacities to explore and to learn. Such motivations or such natural inclinations are essential for the socio-psychological development and represents the principal source of enjoyment and vitality throughout the life. What is intrinsic motivation we have studied. Now let's see what is extrinsic motivation. The extrinsic motivation is concerned with the coercion and the obligation. Indeed, much of the activities performed by the people is curtailed by social pressure and lacks the perception of choice. The conditions such as participating in sports, to receive the prize money, to win a trophy, or to avoid the punishment or negative evaluation and others typifies the external regulations as per the Deci and Ryan given in 1985. Now let's see what is A motivation. The A motivation represents the lack of intention in to engage in any act. When a motivated individual has a feeling of incompetence or they expect it not the yield to a desired outcome. Thus, in optimal performance, there is a need to provide the appropriate individual attention. It could be a coach or a media or a friend, husband or wife or any other who may act as a motivation for mediating the regulation. Now let's see what is muscular endurance and the strength development. Before understanding this, let's have a look at the skeletal muscle. A skeletal muscle consists of a number of muscle fibers bound together by the connective tissues. These muscles attached to the bones by collagen fiber known as the tendons and allow the skeletal or specific body movement. Within each muscle fiber, there are myofibrils, strands which contain contractile filaments made up of actin and myosin proteins. As we can see from this picture as well, these filaments arranged in alternating bands slide across each other to shorten the muscle. Simultaneous shortening of many fibers within a whole muscle leads to muscular tension, recognized as contraction. Depending on how quickly a muscle fiber contracts, it can be categorized as either a slow twitch muscle fiber or a fast twitch muscle fiber. A slow twitch muscle fiber type 1 is an oxygen dependent and it contracts relatively slowly but for a longer duration without fatigue. However, a fast twitch muscle fiber type 2 are not oxygen dependent and it contracts more rapidly than a slow twitch fiber, but it exhausts relatively faster. The proportion of these muscle fiber varies from person to person based on both genetic and training complementing their sport. For instance, individuals running in a marathon have higher level of slow twitch fibers, whereas the weight lifters have more fast twitch fibers. Now let's have a look at endurance and strength development. Appropriate exercise training is associated with the increased strength and endurance of skeletal muscles. Muscular strength refers to the amount of force that a particular muscle or group can exert against the resistance, while endurance is the ability to sustain repeated contraction against a resistance for an extended period of time. Muscular strength develops as a consequence of increase in the size of muscle fiber known as the hypertrophy. It occurs due to the increase in total amount of actin, myosin and other myofibril proteins, or due to the contractile element, that is myofibril per fiber, or with the strength and the thickness of connective tissues, tendons and ligaments. Enhanced local endurance is associated with an increase in the number of capillaries in active muscles, myoglobin concentration and energy molecule, glycogen and several enzymes such as creatine, kinase, phosphofructokinase which facilitate the energy production. Muscular strength and endurance could be achieved by resistance training, also referred as the weight training or strength training. It includes exercise with measured weights or other resistive equipments such as exercise band or balls. Resistance exercises stress the body's musculoskeletal system, thereby enlarging the muscle fiber and improving neural control of muscle functions. The training methods for muscle strength and endurance can be categorized as isotonic, concentric, or eccentric. The isotonic training method is characterized by the contraction of muscles under a consistent load, that is, the force being exerted by the muscle is greater than the external force which opposes the muscle, resulting in the movement of the body. For example, curl an arm holding a 10-pound weight. The isotonic contractions can be either concentric or eccentric. Concentric contractions occur as a consequence force exerted by shortening of muscles. The eccentric force remains in the muscles while the muscle is lengthening. The isometric type of training includes that the muscle length remains consistent throughout the contraction. There is no visible movement of the body parts, but tension in the arm muscles could be felt. As we can see from these pictures also, which is showing the isotonic contraction and isometric contractions. In the isometric contraction, it maintains the posture and the equilibrium. An example of an isometric contraction is when you hold a weight in your hand at arm's length in front of you, as can be seen from this picture. The arm is not moving, but you feel tension in your arm muscles. So, such an contraction is an isometric kind of contraction of muscles. The next is the isokinetic type of contraction. These are the contraction which club both isotonic and isometric contraction, that is, muscle changes length during the contraction as well as produce movement of a constant speed. In other words, there is consistent muscle contraction speed within a moving body part. This requires specialized equipments, for example, mini gym or Cybex, etc. because these fluctuates according to the amount of muscle exertion applied. Maximum resistive force is permitted throughout the entire range of the joint motion. Now students, let's understand the development of aerobic and anaerobic endurance, how these are developed. Let's come to the aerobic endurance. This is basically characterized by the moderate contraction of the large muscles group in our body for an extended period of time. This demands the supply of oxygen and nutrients to the working tissues and removal of the metabolic substrates produced during the exercise. For example, the exercise like swimming, bicycling and the distance running. Thus, aerobic endurance training focuses on improving the capacity and efficiency of cardiorespiratory system, including our lungs, heart and vascular system, so that a greatest amount of the oxygen can be supplied to the body cells. The next, that is the anaerobic, or the one which doesn't involve the oxygen at all. The anaerobic endurance is generally characterized by the strong contractions from the activities. It rapidly requires the energy which could be obtained from the breakdown of the ATC, CP and glycolysis. Such athletic activities include basketball, tennis, ice hockey or soccer, etc. Under this scenario, the development of ATP, CP and glycolysis energy system are tremendously important to the anaerobic endurance. The physiological adaptation post-anaerobic endurance training need to be understood in more detail. The endurance training induces specific changes in the immediate and short-term energy system in response to the demand of anaerobic metabolism during exercise. Consistent with the principle of specificity, there are no concomitant increase in aerobic functions. The change in anaerobic function include number 1, an increased level of anaerobic substrate including the ATP and CP. Number 2, an increased level of enzyme activity that controls the anaerobic or glycolytic phase of glucose catabolism, such as creatine kinase. This enzyme is responsible for the oxidation of CP and consequently the energy released is utilized by the resynthesis of ATP. And number 3, in addition to the ATP-CP system, anaerobic training also increases the glycolytic or lactic acid system capacity. Trained individuals have higher level of lactic acid following a maximal workout. This enhanced capacity is apparently due to the increased activity level of glycogen and glycolytic enzyme. For example, increased activity of phosphofructokinase enzymes lead to faster and greater amount of glycogen breakdown to the lactic acid. The latter in turn is utilized in the production of energy carrier ATP. Therefore, increased capacity for lactic acid and ATP-CP induce an enhanced performance of anaerobic activities. Let's see the physiological adaptation post-aerobic endurance training. With adequate training stimulus, diverse physiologic and metabolic factors related to oxygen transport undergoes improvement. The metabolic adaptation includes the mitochondria and carbohydrate and fat metabolism. Endurance training leads to increase in the size and the number of mitochondria in active skeletal muscle fiber than less active fibers. The enlarged mitochondria and enzyme activity is associated with increased capacity to generate ATP aerobically. Within 5 to 10 days of training, it has been observed that increase in aerobic system enzymes coincides with increased mitochondrial capacity to generate ATP aerobically. The enzymatic changes allows a person to sustain a high percentage of aerobic capacity during a prolonged exercise without accumulation of blood lactate. The next metabolic adaptation is the change in carbohydrate and fat metabolism. With endurance training, the capacity of skeletal muscles to oxidize both carbohydrate and fat increases. The substrate to be utilized for energy depends on the intensity of the endurance exercise. During low intensity endurance exercise, both fat and carbohydrates are metabolized. However, with an increasing exercise intensity, there is a shift towards carbohydrate metabolism than fat. After a period of intense steady state exercise, muscle glycogen store becomes significantly depleted. The individual experience fatigue regardless of the presence of an adequate oxygen supply. Endurance training induces an increased muscular competency to metabolize carbohydrate and enhanced glycogen storage, which can be attributed to an increased mitochondrial oxidative capacity as a consequence of increase in number and size. There is an increase in the level of enzyme activity involved in Krebs cycle and electron transport system, which facilitate production of higher amount of ATPs in presence of oxygen. There is an enhanced glycogen storage within the muscles due to increased activity of enzymes, decreased hepatic glycogenolysis and gluconeogenesis. At the onset of the exercise, neuronal stimulation increases lipolysis, that is triglycerol stored in the adipose tissue break down into fatty acids and glycerol. These fatty acids are metabolized to mitochondria for the oxidation. Research studies among trained and untrained subjects have suggested that endurance training does not increase the whole body lipolytic response for a given intensity of exercise. The trained muscle utilizes intramuscular triglycerols as the primary source for the fatty acid oxidation. However, with an increase in exercise duration, it is likely that relative contribution of intramuscular triglycerol to total fat oxidation declines and of the plasma fatty acid increases. The factors which contribute to these adaptive responses are increased density of mitochondria in skeletal muscles, proliferation of the capillaries within the skeletal muscles, and an increase in the enzyme activities. The next change in the metabolic adaptation is the lactate threshold. Trained athletes such as the distant runners, swimmers and cyclists are able to perform with great capacity and without being fatigued due to decreased rate of lactate formation. Such adaptation is beneficial for individuals who need high aerobic endurance. The reduced level of lactate formation can be attributed to efficient oxidation of glycogen and fatty acids and the production of ATP through aerobic metabolism. Now let's have a look at the muscular adaptation. The change in the slow and the fast twitch muscle fiber indicate that endurance training enables the muscle fiber to produce ATP aerobically more potentially. Selective hypertrophy has been observed among the trained athletes as compared to untrained with specific overload training. Aerobically trained athletes, for example distance runners, have higher percentage of slow twitch fibers than untrained individuals. The next change is in the myoglobin. The myoglobin protein in the muscle has the ability to combine with oxygen and store it. When oxygen becomes limited during exercise, myoglobin releases the stored oxygen to the mitochondria. Therefore, it serves as a mean for the rapid delivery of oxygen during high level of muscular activity. Let's see the cardiovascular adaptation. The cardiovascular adaptation include cardiac dynamics, the maximal oxygen uptake and oxygen extraction, the change in the blood flow, change in blood pressure and change in blood volume. Now let's see what is cardiac dynamic. In aerobic endurance training, the thickness of ventricular wall remains same, but the size of ventricular cavity increases. It enables more ventricular filling with the blood during diastolic or resting phase of the cardiac cycle. Consequently, stroke volume and cardiac output increases, which allow a larger blood flow to the muscles. As training progresses, heart rate for a standard workload as well as rest decreases. Therefore, a trained individual is able to achieve requisite cardiac output at lower heart rate. However, during a intensity exercise, heart rate increases to accomplish increased demand of cardiac output. Let's see the change in maximal oxygen uptake. The maximal oxygen uptake represents an individual's cardiorespiratory capacity. Since it relates to the body size, it is usually expressed as milliliters of oxygen per kilogram of the body weight per unit of time. A maximal oxygen uptake above 50 ml per kg per minute for males and 40 ml per kg per minute for the female indicate good level of cardiorespiratory fitness, and it's attained with the endurance training. A trained athlete has approximately 60% higher VO2 max than a sedentary subject, attained during the increased stroke volume and cardiac output. Further, aerobic training increases the quantity of the oxygen extracted from the circulating blood, which can be measured as arteriovenous oxygen difference. Besides, increased cardiac output, enhanced capacity of trained muscles fibers to extract oxygen supplement the cardiorespiratory endurance. Improved aerobic capacity in older individual as with the aging capacity to improve the cardiac output with training diminishes. With training, the cardiovascular system adapts itself to meet the higher demands for oxygen and metabolic substrate during exercise. There is an increase in the blood flow to the muscles, which could be attributed to an increased capillarization in skeletal muscles, the recruitment of existing capillaries which were otherwise dormant in musculature, more effective distribution of the blood flow from inactive regions to the active muscles, or due to the increased blood volume. There is a change in blood pressure as well. A healthy individual does not experience significant change in the resting blood pressure in response to the endurance training. However, recovery of the blood pressure to pre-exercise level is improved. There is a change in the blood volume. The endurance training increased the blood volume of an individual, contributed by increase in the plasma volume and red blood cells. This leads to the reduced blood viscosity and consequently reduced resistance to the blood flow across the vasculature. Increased blood volume facilitates the heat dissipation from core of the body to periphery. At the same time, enhanced RBC cells or hemoglobin increase the capacity of circulatory system to carry oxygen and other metabolic substrate. Let's see the pulmonary adaptations. Despite proficient cardiovascular system, endurance would be hindered if the respiratory system is unable to supply enough oxygen. Therefore, the physiological changes following the endurance training include increased pulmonary ventilation due to increase in the tidal volume and respiratory frequency. There is an increase in AVO2 difference which demonstrate a lower mixed venous oxygen content. This means that blood returning to heart contains less oxygen than it would be in an untrained individual. The figure demonstrates the aerobic capacity and muscular adaptation with the endurance training. Other aerobic training adaptation besides the above mentioned include that there are physiological changes experienced by the trained athlete as well, and these changes are changes in the body composition, in the body heat and psychological benefits. That means the overweight and obese individual undergoing exercise training shows reduction in the body mass and the body fat. The larger plasma volume and in the enhanced thermoregulatory mechanism enables the trained individuals to exercise more comfortably in the hot environment. This is because they dissipate heat faster than the sedentary individual. And the psychological benefits include that regardless of the age, the degree of potential benefit or adaptation achieved is often similar to the achieved with the other therapeutic intervention. So students, let's summarize what we have understood from this particular module on physical conditioning. We have understood that endurance training facilitates cellular and physiological adaptations that enhance the functional capacity and exercise performance. To improve the performance, an effective exercise program focuses on improving the specific energy system, which dominates a given activity. Physical conditioning optimizes improvement on the basis of the principles like overload, specificity, individual differences, reversibility and the motivation. The aerobic training adaptations increase the mitochondrial size and their number, the quantity of aerobic enzymes, muscle capillarization and fat and carbohydrate oxidation. So, these metabolic and physiological changes contributes towards enhancing the aerobic ATP production. It also induces the functional and dimensional changes in the cardiorespiratory system to decrease the resting and submaximal axis heart rate, enhances the stroke volume and cardiac output, and expands the AVO2 difference, the factor that affects the magnitude of the training. Improvement includes the exercise intensity, the initial fitness level, frequency, exercise duration and training mode. So, to conclude, we can say that anaerobic and aerobic training programs basically persuade the cardiorespiratory, muscular and metabolic functions to enhance the exercise performance of an individual. Thank you.